Hello everyone, welcome to Chetan Bharat Learning and welcome back to our series of UPSC Mains 2021 course and test series. This course is designed for those people, those of you who have cleared their prelims examination and are appearing for their mains examination. And as far as those people are concerned who were not able to clear the prelims examination and are planning to give UPSC next year, well, this course is relevant for you guys as well. All right. Now, in this series, what we do is, I personally take economics portion for your mains. Now, what we do is that we try to cover each and every issue that would be important, that is pertinent for your mains examination through a question or answer format. So through questions, we try to cover as many issues as possible. In every lecture, we cover 5 questions, and through those 5 questions, we try to cover 5 issues that would be important for your mains examination. And who knows, maybe a question repeats itself in the mains examination. What we have discussed over here might show up in the mains examination. So pay attention to this lecture. Now, as you guys already know, who are following our lectures, those of you who have enrolled with us, well, we have shared this timetable with you, right? So as far as the economics portion is concerned, we are at this position, right? We have covered 8 lectures, and through 8 lectures, we have covered 40 issues or 40 questions. Now today, it's economics lecture 9. All right. So today we are going to cover a different portion of your GS3 syllabus. It is lecture number 9 in this series, and through the 5 questions that we are going to discuss in this lecture, we'll cover that portion of your GS3 syllabus. All right. Now, which portion are we covering through 5 questions in this lecture? Effects of liberalization on the economy, changes in industrial policy, and their effects on industrial growth. So this particular section is focused on industry section. Right? All right then. Without further ado, without much delay, let's start with question number 1. Government has no business being in business. Examine in the light of India's approach to disinvestment since liberalization. Analyze whether there is a need to relook at the policy of disinvestment. Now, you need to read the first statement carefully. This particular statement, this statement in quotes. Government has no business being in business. You know, there is a set of economists who are also known as free market economists or laissez-faire economists. These people say, free market economists say, that government has no business in business. That means government shouldn't have any companies. Government shouldn't conduct business. By that I mean government shouldn't have any commercial operations. So for example, government in India has various business ventures. Government has banks, government has its own companies, government has its own petroleum companies, coal companies. There are various companies that government is operating. We call them PSUs. Well, you know, these laissez-faire economists say that government shouldn't be involved in these PSUs. These things, these commercial aspects of an economy should be handled by private players. They argue, what they say, they use a word for government. They say government is a necessary evil. By that they mean that for an economy to flourish properly, government is required. But government should be limited to certain aspects. There should be a limited form of government. Now, what do we mean by limited government? You see, there are certain essential things, there are certain essential goods, certain essential services that only governments can provide, right? There are certain things, for example, law and order, national defense, public administration. There are certain services, there are certain things that only government can provide. Government should limit itself to those functions. These functions are also known as core functions of the government. Government should provide security to its people through its police and army. Government should provide the service of national defense, public administration. Government should provide certain essential features. Government should perform only certain essential functions. Apart from that, everything else should be left to private players. Now, why do they say that government has no business being in business. This notion of this notion that government should only perform core function means that government has no business in being in business. Government should not have any business operations. Government should restrict itself to its core functions. Now, why is it such a popular idea? Why do people say, especially laissez-faire economists say, that government should restrict itself to core functions? Why? Well, let's take a look at that. Why government shouldn't, it's not government's business to be in business? Well, there are certain public goods that can only be provided by government. Now, public goods by their definition mean that those goods that cannot be provided through a market mechanism. Hence, private players cannot properly distribute these goods. So, government should restrict itself to providing public goods. Now, what these public goods can be law and order, right? Public administration, roads, parks, public parks, and so on and so forth. Right? So these public goods should be provided only by the government. That's it. Now in India, government is involved in various operations. Government has its own banks. Government has its own insurance companies like LIC. Government had its own airline operator, Air India. Government was involved in business. They say that when government involves itself in business, well, as you know, government has limited resources. Now, if government is involved in business, then a lot of resources that could have been invested over here are diverted towards these areas, these commercial operations. So if government quits its commercial operations, government would have more resources, more time, money, energy to spend on providing public goods. And public goods is actually the essential function of a government. Government cannot compromise with that. Government has to provide you with certain services. Government has to provide you with certain things. If government is diverting certain resources away from these public goods, well, then government is doing a disservice to you, because government's essential, government's promise is that it provides you with these public goods. Right? So public goods can only be provided. So why government should not be involved in business? To provide public goods. Why government should not be involved in business? Because there shouldn't be any diversion from these public goods. Right? So in a sense, we have answered the first part of the question. We have explained this quote. Government has no business in being in business. Right? There is one another reason. Government is not designed to enter into business operations, because government would be very inefficient. Government should do what it does best, providing public goods. Government should not involve itself with commercial operations. Why? Because government is designed in such a fashion that it cannot perform those commercial functions properly, efficiently. So efficiency is one of the biggest reasons why government should get out of commercial things, commercial ventures. You must have seen this in your lives also. As far as PSUs in India are concerned, they don't perform optimally. So there are two companies in India with respect to telecom sector. One is BSNL, that is operated by Government of India. The other is Airtel or Jio. What do you think? Which company performs better? Airtel or BSNL? Of course, the company operated by private players perform better because they are designed in a way. Government cannot perform better or well in commercial operations, and you know this by looking at the situation of BSNL or any other PSU for that matter, right? Therefore, government shouldn't be in this area. Why? First of all, government is not being efficient. Government is not providing efficient telecom services through BSNL. Then government is diverting certain resources because some of these PSUs are loss making. So taxpayers' money is being wasted in these ventures. That taxpayers' money could have been utilized in providing public goods. So there is a sort of opportunity cost that is involved over here. Right? Make sense? Now, second part is, examine in the light of India's approach to disinvestment since liberalization. Okay, now let's take a look at what has been government's approach. What has been government's approach since liberalization? Well, before liberalization, government was heavily invested in business operations. But after liberalization, we decided that we need to privatize certain PSUs. Government needs to get out of business operations. So government started privatizing various companies. Now, privatization is another name for disinvestment. Government stopped investing and government actually diluted its stake. Disinvestment. Now, since 1991, disinvestment has been conducted for two major purposes. One, to bring in efficiency in those PSUs. So, for example, government is running BSNL and government thinks that BSNL is not commercially functioning properly, right? It is not functioning properly. So, government sells 30% stake to private players in an attempt to increase efficiency of BSNL, right? So, number one goal of privatization or disinvestment was efficiency. The other goal was to raise money, to raise non-debt capital receipts, non-debt receipts. Again, by disinvesting, government is selling some of its stake. By selling some stake, government is earning some money, right? So through that, government is raising non-debt receipts. So two major reasons are there for government to disinvest. One is improving efficiency in the commercial areas in which it is heavily involved. The other is raise non-debt receipts. By raising those non-debt receipts, government is actually trying to utilize these precious resources into areas where it is good. Like I said, when government diverts resources from public goods to other areas, well, it is doing a disservice to public goods. Now, when government gets out of these business areas, raises money through them, and then invests in public goods, infrastructure and all that stuff where it is required, well, then government is doing better. Right? So earlier the disinvestment policy revolved around these two functions, these two major objectives. One is to ensure efficiency, the other was to ensure more money for providing public goods. Right? Now, recently government has decided to change the name of Department of Disinvestment. You see, before all of this, disinvestment was handled by Department of Disinvestment. Now, government has recently changed the name of Department of Disinvestment and it calls it DPAM, Department of Public Asset Management. Now, this change in name is actually very significant. I'll tell you why. Because earlier it was assumed that government is selling some of its asset to raise money and spend it wherever it wants. But government has cleared its stand. Government has said that we are actually not disinvesting. We are doing an important function called public asset management. So you see, government has important functions, right? One important function is providing public goods. Right? The other important function is being in business. Though many people say that government has no business being in business, right? But government as of now, till now has performed these two functions. Government has diverted certain resources towards providing essential things, essential public goods. And government has diverted certain resources towards, well, business. Now, to provide essential public goods, government has created certain assets. And for business also, government has created certain assets. Now, what DPAM does is, what government is trying to do through its disinvestment policy, government is actually selling some of these assets. By selling these assets, government is raising some money. And then government is utilizing this money to create more assets. So government is decreasing this category of assets and increasing this category of assets. All right. So in a way, government is actually shifting resources, shifting from non-essential to essential. That's the policy. There is this another thing that the government has introduced, and that is, you must have heard about it, National Monetization Plan. Government's existing assets, some of those assets are not being monetized. Some of them, those assets are lying idle. Government through National Monetization Plan is planning to monetize some of these assets, raise money through that, and by raising that money, government is again shifting that money towards creating more durable public goods asset. So this has been the policy of the government. And as I say, this question, analyze whether there is a need to relook at the policy of disinvestment. Yes, there is a need to relook. Government should shift its resources from non-essential items to essential assets or essential services, core functions. Right? So this is the entire thing that you need to be familiar with before writing a proper structured answer. Now, how should you write these points? Whatever I have just explained, how should you structure that? Well, you'll get that in your model answer. So in the model answer, you'll get all these points that I have mentioned and some more points and in a structured format. All right. So by reading that, you'll get to know how you should frame your answer. Though as far as the knowledge that is required for answering this question, well, you're familiar with this now. All right. Make sense? All right, then. Let's move on to question number 2. A strong industrial sector is sine qua non for the success of Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. Elaborate. Now, again, let's read the question because like I say always, half the battle is won when you read the question carefully, right? A strong industrial sector is sine qua non for the success of Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. Elaborate. Now, as you must have heard this also, you keep hearing these things, right? That all your answers should be that while writing answers, you should be careful about writing introduction, or let me rephrase this. Your answer should consist of 3 parts: introduction, main body, and conclusion, right? That's what everyone says. Now, in the introduction part, you will explain what Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative is. So you will give a brief definition of Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative and what it seeks to achieve. Also, please do mention, while defining Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative, also please do mention that some people allege that Atmanirbhar Bharat is actually pre-LPG form of import substitution. You must be familiar with this, that before 1991, India followed a policy of import substitution. India followed a policy of import substitution. What did India do in that? Well, India wanted to reduce its imports as much as possible and manufacture Indian-made products. So, for example, India wanted to reduce its imports of cars. And India wanted that India should itself manufacture cars. Rather than importing cars, India should manufacture its cars itself. So how did India try to achieve that? Well, what India did was India increased import duty on these imported cars and reduced taxes on domestically manufactured cars, right? So India was preferring one good, domestically manufactured goods over the other. Right? So this was import substitution. Now, many people allege that Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative is just another way of introducing import substitution. But in the introduction part, you have to write that Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative is not another name for import substitution. What government is trying to do is, government is trying to strengthen its domestic sector. Domestic sector means all the productive activities in India should be efficient, should be good, right? So government is trying to strengthen India's economy through Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. Now, let's answer the body part. Now, as you know, you can, in the introduction part, you'll write what Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative is. Through Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative, we are not trying to follow the policy of import substitution. In fact, we will liberalize trade. We will follow the policy of LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization. We are for globalization. What we are trying to do is, we are trying to strengthen our domestic sector, Indian manufactured sector, right? Now, how can a strong industrial sector be a sine qua non for the success of Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative? Now, as you have mentioned in the introduction part, what Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative is, it's a way to strengthen India's economy, right? So how can industrial sector be instrumental or important or critical for strengthening India's economy through Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative? Let's answer that. Well, as you guys all know, that any economy, for that matter, but especially Indian economy, consists of three major sectors. One is agriculture and allied activities. The other is industrial sector. The other is services sector. Right? So if I want to prove that industrial sector is critical for development or for growth in all sectors, right? Because if all sectors are growing, then only India's economy is becoming strengthened, right? Makes sense? So how is industrial sector so key that if we grow in, if we become an industrialized nation, if we grow if gross value added by industrial sector increases, well, it will not only benefit the industrial sector, it will benefit the entire economy. How can you prove that? Well, first of all, you'll explain the linkages between these sectors. You'll explain that how a flourishing industrial sector would support growth in agriculture and allied activities. How a flourishing industrial sector would support a growing services sector. So you'll explain the linkages between these three sectors. So let me give you an example. How can growth in industrial sector be good for agriculture and allied activities? Well, number one, well, a lot of raw material that goes into industrial sector comes from agriculture and allied activities. For example, textile industries. Now, textile industries also require raw material. That raw material can be cotton, can be other stuff that is grown agriculturally. So cotton-dependent textile industries are dependent on agriculture for their raw material. Now, if textile industry grows, then demand for cotton would increase. When demand for cotton would increase, don't you think that would benefit the cotton growers? That would benefit the farmers who grow cotton, because demand for their cotton would increase, right? So if textile sector improves, well, cotton growing farmers also stand to benefit. And there are various other, cotton is just one example, there are various other raw materials that are utilized in industrial sector that are actually made in the agriculture sector. So a growing industrial sector would increase demand for agricultural products. And when that happens, agriculture stands to benefit. All right, so this is one linkage. The other linkage, the other example of how a flourishing industrial sector would support agriculture and allied activities. Well, certain agricultural, certain farming operations require certain machines. Farmers these days require tractors. Farmers these days require thresher, combines. Farmers these days require fertilizers, right? All these inputs that are utilized in farming operations are manufactured in the industrial sector. So fertilizers are part of industrial sector. Tractors, combine, thresher, pesticide, all these things are part of industrial sector. So if industrial sector is growing, well, supply of inputs for agricultural sector also increases. And hence, in a sense, both of them are codependent. So if you focus through Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative on the industrial sector, well, agriculture sector stands to benefit. These are just two linkages that I have explained. There are multiple linkages through which industrial sector can support agriculture sector. Now let's talk about this connection. Industrial sector, how industrial sector supports services sector. Well, if the volume of goods and services increases, if the volume of goods increases that are being manufactured in the industrial sector, well, those goods are to be transported also. Well, what is transportation? Transportation is a service, right? If manufacturing companies increase in India, well, they would require help of certain professionals like chartered accountants. They would require lawyers also to frame contracts, right? They would require a lot of professional services. Make sense? So when industrial sector grows, factories grow, they require certain services. And as a matter of fact, growth in industrial sector would increase demand for services. Right? So services sector stand to benefit. There will be a requirement of, if more goods and services, if more goods are produced, there will be demand for transportation, there will be demand for storage. If companies grow in size, there will be demand for professionals, there will be demand for lawyers to frame contracts and all that, there will be demand for chartered accountants, and there will be demand for consultants, there will be demand for MBAs, right? So there will be demand for many services. Clear? There will be demand for banking services. There will be demand for financial services if industrial sector grows. So in a sense, industrial sector, if you focus, if Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative becomes successful in improving industrial sector, well, it will benefit the entire economy, because a flourishing industrial sector is absolutely essential, critical for agriculture sector as well and services sector as well. Hence this line, a strong industrial sector is sine qua non for the success of Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative, is correct. Plus, apart from supporting agriculture and allied activities and services sector, industrial sector in itself has certain other benefits. It would give a boost to employment. Increase in employment would make people increase in employment would mean that people have more cash in hand, because if you're earning, if you're employed, well, you're earning money. More employment would lead to more cash in hand. More cash in hand would lead to increase in aggregate demand. And aggregate demand for what? Aggregate demand for industrial goods, aggregate demand for food and other agricultural products, aggregate demand for services. So it will increase employment, it will increase aggregate demand, and it would lead to development. Overall development, right? Hence, we can clearly say that a strong industrial sector is sine qua non for the success of Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. Let's suppose Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative becomes successful, but it fails to make industrial sector a success. Well, then in that case, India's economy won't get strengthened. Why? Because improving an industrial sector is absolutely critical for Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. Without that, Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative would be an empty promise. All right? Make sense? Now let's move on to question number 3. Discuss the extent to which investment in innovation translates into output in India. What do you suggest should be the policy imperatives to ensure the same? Well, this question is actually inspired from a chapter in Economic Survey this year. Well, that chapter argued that India should invest more on innovation, because innovation would lead to enhancement of GDP. These days, technological progress is the biggest decider of whether an economy can grow or not. Right? Technological progress leads to growth. Technological progress leads to economic dividends. All the other developed countries have shown the same. Well, those developed countries are developed because there was technological progress over there. Currently, China is also growing on the back of technological progress, right? So this chapter in Economic Survey argues that India needs to start investing in innovation, investing in research and development. India needs to start focusing more on research and development, focusing more on innovation, focusing more on technological progress, because technological progress, innovation actually leads to enhancement in output. And by output here, we mean economic output. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with the term economic output. Well, economic output actually means GDP. If you want India to become a $5 trillion economy, and by $5 trillion we mean India's GDP should be $5 trillion, worth $5 trillion by 2025. If you want this target, if you want to achieve this target, well, innovation, research and development, technological progress is the path to follow. Clear? So therefore, discuss the extent to which investment in innovation translates into output in India. Now, this question can be divided into two parts. Part one of the question wants you to answer how technological progress, investment in innovation would lead to enhanced economic outcomes for India. So you'll explain this link. You'll explain the link between innovation and output. So first part of the question wants you to explain the link between innovation and output, or establish a positive correlation between innovation and output. Clear? And the second part wants you to answer what policy should India follow? What policy should India follow to achieve this target? Or what policy should India follow to enhance innovation so that eventually we can enhance India's output? So what should be government's policy? The second part of the question wants you to answer that. And the first part is you have to establish the link between innovation and output. Now, to establish the link between innovation and output in India, you need to first mention the sort of the scenario in India. You need to explain what is the position as far as innovation is concerned. What is the position of innovation in India? Right? So you need to explain the current scenario. How is innovation, R&D, technical progress doing in India? Clear? So let's take a look at this. India's current position with respect to innovation. India entered the top 50 innovating countries for the first time since the inception of Global Innovation Index. GII stands for Global Innovation Index. In 2007, by improving its rank from 81 in 2015 to 48 in 2020. India ranks first in Central and South Asia and third amongst lower middle income group economies. India is ranked second lowest after Brazil on innovation outputs and innovation inputs amongst top 10 economies. India is a positive outlier on most of the pillars and sub-pillars of GII. You see, Global Innovation Index actually ranks countries on the basis of certain parameters. Now, India is performing very well on most of these parameters, except some. India is a negative outlier. That means India does not perform well in terms of its GDP. What do we mean by that? What we mean is that India, as far as innovation is concerned, India is doing very well. But if we compare our innovation with our GDP, well, India is not doing that well. How? With India's GDP, India's innovation should have been here, but it's actually here. India has a big GDP. India's GDP is quite big, right? So according to its GDP levels, India's innovation should have been there, but it's here. So it's not performing proportionate to its GDP. Though as far as its development levels are concerned, it is performing proportionate to its development levels, but as far as GDP is concerned, India can do better, right? Hence we have written India is a negative outlier. In any case, let's see further. How can innovation support output? Now, in this part of the answer, we are going to establish the link between innovation and output. There was this economist called Solow. Solow said that output per worker mainly depends on savings, population growth, and technical progress. So Solow, back in 1956, said that output can be enhanced if savings in an economy increases, population increases, and technological progress increases. And this is known as Solow model. However, new growth theory endogenizes technological progress and suggests several determinants of the same. These include human capital, search for new ideas by profit-oriented researchers, infrastructure improving quality of existing products. New economic theory suggests that technological progress is the most important factor. Solow model suggested that savings and population growth are also important. But new economic theory suggests that the most important factor is technological progress. Now, this new economic theory, new growth theory also suggests how can you improve technological progress. By that I mean that on what factors does technological progress depends. Technological progress of a country depends on which factors? Well, it depends upon human capital, how many PhDs we have, how many scientists we have, how many researchers we have. It depends on that. Then search for new ideas by profit-oriented researchers. Profit-oriented researchers. There are certain researchers, there are certain scientists that are employed by companies themselves because companies are trying to improve their product. So for example, many scientists are employed in robotics firm. Many scientists in USA are employed in, many astrophysicists are employed in Tesla, sorry, not Tesla, SpaceX, right? So many companies employ these scientists because these companies have profit motive. Many pharmaceutical companies employ Pfizer, Moderna, Merck. They employ scientists because they have a profit motive at the profit motive behind that, right? So this profit motive enhances the search for new ideas. And this profit motive actually supports innovation. So search for new ideas by profit-oriented researchers. You should have good infrastructure. You should have good labs, good universities, right? Improving quality of existing products. All these factors would support technological progress. Research showed that small enterprises' research and development activities brought large returns to national economy through new technologies. An increase of 10% in R&D investment, R&D means research and development, has been associated with productivity gains ranging from 1.1 to 1.4%. So your output can grow by this much if you increase your investment in R&D by this much. So this establishes the link between this. There is a positive correlation between past innovation performance and current GDP per capita. India has performed below expectations for its past innovation performance in terms of recent GDP per capita. Right? So this is the link. Now we'll turn to the second part of the question, right? Which says that what policy should India follow? Now, before answering that part, you need to know what sort of policy India currently follows. To answer what sort of policies India should follow in future, you need to tell what sort of policies India follows currently, right? So let's take a look at that. India's performance on innovation. Now, you know, this term is known as gross expenditure on research and development. Gross expenditure on research and development. Now, these lines, what they are trying to, I won't read each and every line, I'll just tell you the summarized form. Well, what they are trying to say is that currently India is actually not performing that well. Why? As compared to certain advanced economies, India's gross expenditure on research and development is pretty low as compared to certain advanced economies, right? Plus, it is generally seen that in advanced economies, you see, expenditure on research and development can be divided into two parts. Expenditure done by government on innovation, expenditure done by private players. And private players can also be divided into two parts, corporate companies and universities, right? So what we found when we analyzed advanced economies, we found that in advanced economies, the reason why they are advanced as far as innovation is concerned is that the maximum expenditure done on R&D is done by private players. Government has very little share in advanced economies. So in advanced economies, majority investment that is directed towards innovation is directed by private players, whether they are corporations, whether they are universities. Well, in India, it's quite the opposite. In India, majority of investment on R&D is done by government. Now, as we have discussed in the first question, that government is pretty inefficient when it comes to these things, right? Now, advanced economies are doing path-breaking research because most of that research is being done by private individuals. In India, maximum money that is being spent on research and development is being spent by government. And this is one reason for inefficiency. So there are two reasons why innovation in India is not performing up to the mark. One, India is not investing that much. India's GERD is pretty low. Number two is maximum GERD is coming from government, which is not a good thing. All right. So this is the current situation. So what should we do now? What sort of policy should India follow? Well, India is able to effectively translate investments in innovation inputs to produce higher level of innovation outputs. This implies that India stands to gain more from its investment into innovation than many other countries. This requires boosting GERD from 0.7% of GDP to at least 2%. Right? Currently, we spend 0.7% of our GDP in terms of expenditure on, we spend 0.7% of GDP on research and development, right? We need to spend more than 2%. It also involves significantly scaling up R&D personnel and researchers. We need more scientists, more researchers, especially in the private sector. This is very important. Not government sector, private sector. India's business sector needs to significantly ramp up GERD. Currently, maximum GERD is coming from government. Business sector needs to step up to a level commensurate to India's status as the 5th largest economy in GDP, in terms of GDP. India should focus on improving its performance on institutions and business sophistication, since higher performance on these dimensions seem to consistently suggest higher innovation output performance. All right, makes sense? So these are the policy imperatives. Clear? All right then, let's move on to question number 4. The issues of India's administrative processes derive less from lack of compliance to processes or regulatory standards, but from over-regulation. Discuss. Well, what this question means is, they say that many sectors in India are not performing well. The reason why they are not performing well is that they are not properly regulated. India is weak in this aspect. Regulations, rules and regulations that govern various sectors in India. Right? India is pretty weak in that. Now, many people argue that the reason why we are weak, why these sectors are not performing well, is that many of the players in these sectors are not following those regulations. So there is no proper regulatory compliance. People in India do not follow rules. Businesses in India, corporates in India do not follow rules. They are not following regulations properly, and that is why they are not performing well. One reason is this. Well, this question is arguing that it's not the reason. In India, regulations or regulatory compliance is not the problem. In fact, empirical evidence suggests, when we compare India with other countries, that in India, regulatory compliance is pretty good. The problem lies in over-regulation. Indian businesses, Indian corporates actually suffer from too many regulations. Too many regulations actually strangle the life out of these corporations. It's like a choke on their neck, right? So that is why this question is arguing that as far as regulations are concerned, the problem is not with regulatory compliance. People follow rules. And in India, people follow rules better than many other countries. The problem is with over-regulation. Discuss. Right? So let's discuss that. Again, this question is inspired from Economic Survey. Economic Survey 2020-21 has highlighted that India's regulatory problems are not because of lack of regulatory standards and poor compliance, but due to the lack of quality and effective enforcement of regulations. Right? As per the World Justice Project's World Rule of Law Index, India's ranking has improved significantly in the category of following due process and administrative proceedings. These are just semantics. All right? Various evidences also show that India over-regulates the economy, which results in undue delay in the critical decision-making process. The problem is not that rules and regulations are not good. Rules and regulations are not being followed. The problem is the quality of regulations, number one, and the problem is over-regulation. Now, why does India over-regulate? Why do we over-regulate? Why do so many rules and regulations crop up? Why does that happen? The survey argues that the root cause of the problem of over-regulation is an approach that attempts to account for every possible outcome without recognizing the inevitability of incomplete contracts and regulations in a world of uncertainty. You see, it is argued that uncertainty will always be there in any sphere of life, right? Now, what we are trying to do is, these regulators who frame rules and regulations, they are trying to make rules and regulations for those uncertainties also. Well, uncertainties are uncertain for a reason. We do not know what will happen. Many of the rules and regulations were not made keeping coronavirus pandemic in mind. But that happened because the world is uncertain, right? So you cannot predict what will happen in the world, what will happen in the future. Make sense? Hence, some contracts would always remain incomplete. But in India, we try to make rules and regulations for unforeseen things as well, and hence we tend to over-regulate. This is the problem with our regulators, including SEBI. SEBI is a regulator for stock market, IRDA for insurance market, PFRDA for pension market, and the biggest among them all, RBI. They tend to over-regulate. As a result, complex rules and regulations lead to excessive and opaque discretion by supervising authorities because of the multiple ways in which they can be interpreted. Too many rules and regulations create legal complexity. They create complexity. And when there is complexity, there are always disputes as to how to interpret those rules and regulations, right? And that is why many matters go to the courts because of lack of clarity on the interpretation of these rules and regulations, all right? There is another problem of regulatory default. What is that problem? Regulations can be easily measured through criteria and checklists, while it is difficult to quantify the amount and quality of supervision. Well, what regulation does is, what RBI does is, if RBI wants to check whether a bank is performing properly or not, it will give you certain metrics which are measurable, quantifiable, like gross NPA ratio, capital adequacy ratio, return on assets. These are quantifiable things. But it's very difficult to measure the qualitative aspects. And it's very difficult to measure whether RBI is supervising these banks qualitatively. It's very easy to measure whether RBI is actually regulating these banks, but it's very difficult to check whether RBI is properly supervising these banks, because supervising is a qualitative function. Regulating is a quantifiable function, right? So, because of this, regulators generally follow the rule of, they prefer quantity over quality because quantity is easily measurable. Hence, regulators and decision makers thus naturally tend to substitute supervision with mere mechanical regulations and does not exercise discretion even when it's available. More regulations added over time lead to their ineffectiveness. When you over-regulate a particular industry, people will shift from that industry. Like, for example, increasing bank regulations has led to shifting of market activity to NBFCs, shadow banks. Because shadow banks are not heavily regulated, but banking sector is, people are shifting towards shadow banks because regulations in the shadow banking sector are not that big or are not that many in number, right? They're not imposing on you. So whenever there is regulatory arbitrage, which means one particular sector is overly regulated and a substitute sector is under-regulated, then people shift to that sector. And that leads to ineffectiveness because those regulations were created to make banking sector more efficient. But these regulations have made banking sector inefficient, and hence people are shifting. So they have defeated their own purpose. They created those rules to help the banking sector, but banking sector is actually getting choked under these rules and regulations, right? So it is actually being counterproductive. Too much of regulations lead to government departments follow default precedent in order to reduce any questioning later on. Yes, government also prefers, government babus and government officials also prefer regulations. Why? Because if they are following those regulations, if they are regulating their industries or the people they are about, the organizations that they are regulating, that they were installed to regulate, if they are regulating them properly, well, no one would question them, especially on corruption charges. But if it favors a particular organization over the other, then questions of corruption could be raised. Hence, government officials also favor regulations rather than discretion. All right? So this is the reason. Now, yeah. So it was a short question. It was basically a 150-word question. So I think these many words are enough. You'll get these things in your model answer. All right? All right, let's move forward. Let's move to the last question. MSME sector is referred to as the growth engine of Indian economy. In the light of this statement, discuss the challenges and solutions pertaining to the MSME sector. Well, it's a very easy question. It's kind of a lollipop that is given to you. This question is very easy. Well, what you have to do is very simple. It's very simple to structure this question also. You'll have to write why MSME sector is so crucial. Why is it called the engine of Indian economy or the backbone of Indian economy? Well, because it is the second largest employer after agriculture and allied activities, right? 40% of your exports happen through MSME sector, right? Then it leads to balanced development. It leads to inclusive growth. Right? And many more. You'll find them in the model answer, and I'm sure that you already know about this. Why MSME sector is known as the engine of Indian economy. Now, the second part of the question is also pretty direct. What are the challenges facing MSME sector? What are the solutions? Let me give you some examples of the challenges. Well, one challenge is lack of adequate credit support, right, which leads to liquidity shortages. Then number 2, slow adoption of technology. Then lack of access to capital, right? Yeah. Then skilled manpower shortage. Clear? Yeah. So there are many challenges that MSME sector faces. Well, some of these challenges are here, right? These are the important challenges. Now, what can be the solutions? Well, in the solutions part, you will mention certain government schemes. For example, Aspire, Spurti, Pradhan Mantri Employment Generation Program, Prime Minister Employment Generation Program, NRLM, right? National Urban Livelihoods Mission, National Rural Livelihoods Mission, and various other government support, various other things that government has already done. And then, after writing certain schemes, after mentioning certain schemes that the government has taken to support the MSME sector, you'll write what more can the government do? Well, government can improve access to credit. Well, government can provide capital-based subsidy to MSME sector so that they can adopt emerging technologies, right? Government should come up with various missions, which government already has. Government should come up with various missions to skill various unemployable folks so that they are employable in MSME sector, right? So labor shortages don't crop up in MSME sector, and so on and so forth, all right? So this question is pretty simple to answer. It's very simple to structure also. They have divided this question into 3 parts. In the first part, you'll write the importance of MSME sector. Why is MSME sector useful? You'll mention these things. Then you'll write about the challenges of MSME sector, then the solutions, and that's it. And this question is answered. All right.